Well, once again, I'm very excited and delighted to have one of my favorite people on the show. And I get to say that every week. And it's always true because one of the things I love is collaborating with other people of like mind and of like heart. So our guest today is Adrienne Glasser. She is an embodiment expert. I like to say an embodiment expert, and also helps people heal unprocessed trauma with a focus on parts work and also how we actually look at our healing through a somatic lens. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. Adrienne, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, TJ.
Yeah, and we've had some really fun conversations, and I'm excited that we get to have this fun conversation on air, talking about, within the LGBTQ plus community, how we can be a space for greater healing. And as you and I were preparing for the show, a couple of topics came up, and that is embodied shame, or a sense of a belief in brokenness, and it's a topic that comes up often, and really that is unprocessed trauma. So I'm wondering, as I say both of those things, what's present for you in that conversation?
Yeah, it's interesting to say what is present for me in that, right? So I'm hearing like brokenness and unprocessed shame. And I just flash to like the faces of a lot of the LGBTQ folks that I work with. And what that feels like in the room and what that looks like. And how my role is always normalizing that this is part of our experience. Most people who are LGBTQ did not have the experience of being able to be authentic in a way that felt safe. And so having internalized shame and feeling broken is more the norm than not. Like, why wouldn't you with the systemic burdens that we have, right? So really normalizing that. And then also there's this moment of saying, like, there are no bad parts of us. Yeah. Like parts of us either hold wounding or are defensive based on our experience, and that there is no bad part of you. There's an instant sort of calming that happens in the room, in people's bodies, when I start talking about how there's actually no bad parts. And we debate this of like, well, what about my addiction? Or what about me living in secret or acting out, or right? And just the relief that happens, the shame lifting that happens when we talk about the fact that there's no bad parts of people.
Well, I love this because the way I say it is shame doesn't heal shame. And yet sometimes I think unconsciously some of the models focus on what we need to shift or change, which of course, there are lots of things that we might want to shift or change. But to start with, what you're starting with is that there's no bad parts. In other words, all these parts are useful and they came from somewhere. And I really appreciate that you acknowledge, like, I don't think any LGBTQ person who I've ever met got out without a lot of this shame just because of society, right? And you said something that I think is really important, and that is authenticity. So many of us either have to, or at least, very least, believe we have to put on a role, pretend to be someone who we're not. So we're really abandoning and burying these parts of ourselves. And then, of course, as you and I know well, we develop strategies for survival, and they do help us. And then, they don't come to you until they're like, oh, this isn't working so well. And it might be, oh my gosh, how do I get rid of this? And you're saying, let's start with let's start at a different starting point, if you will.
Yeah, it's a different starting point of acceptance. Like I always hear, I keep abandoning myself. And my response is always, well, you wouldn't be doing that if you didn't have a reason to. If you felt safe enough, then you don't need to abandon yourself. And some part of you does not feel safe. And that is why we go into habitual behaviors, right? So there's this shame even in the abandonment of ourselves, where it's actually accepting it's normal to do that if you haven't been safe growing up. If you haven't been safe growing up, you're going to abandon yourself to stay safe. Like all of those behaviors were to get small so you wouldn't get harmed. And with the systemic burdens that we have, it makes sense to do that. Like if you didn't do that, you would be in danger. And to start to get curious about what is safe now, what does that mean now when there's so much systemic burdens that still exist? And I keep thinking of the word sanctuary, that we're creating like an inner sanctuary in the body of safety, and that we can get curious about how can we feel safe in the body or in moments, right? That we can keep coming back to and strengthening this awareness of, oh, in this moment, there are glimpses of safety where, we might not be safe all the time, but to be
Wow.
able to start to notice where we are safe and how that feels in the body. Because we can talk about safety all day, but unless it's a felt experience and a reparative experience, it doesn't actually have like the same impact.
Well, of course, I love everything that you're saying. And in my model conscious recovery, I acknowledge the first important step in recovery is safety. And a lot of times when people think of safety, they think of external safety, which of course is important. You go to therapy, you find support groups, you find a way to have some external safety in community, chosen community. What we're talking about, in addition to that, is so much deeper, and that is internal safety. And as you said so eloquently, when we're really little people and we abandon that part of ourselves, or it feels too scary to be present with what's happening in our life, of course we do continue to abandon ourselves. And I love that you're not only normalizing that, but you're also saying, you didn't say these exact words, but like you created that as a way to manage something that feels so unsafe. And, that's classic addiction. I feel completely dysregulated and unsafe internally. So I'm going to look for someone or something outside of myself to try to soothe that. And of course, it can work for a while. Drugs and alcohol can work for a while. What we might call addictive relationships, which we could do a whole show on that. Yeah. But like trying to plug into someone or something to feel safe. And the deeper work here is to reconnect with, and I know you and I meet in a place of talking about spirituality. And even with spirituality, sometimes people think of that as external, but it's really an inner experience. And safety is an interesting word because to me, the anchoring in that and starting to be present with myself, like if you're working with someone who has substance use disorder, as we call it today, we have been running from ourselves for so long. So just to be able to, even for 3 minutes, sit with myself and realize, oh, I actually can do that, because it's not a cognitive process, this healing. And I know that you work a lot with the somatic or in the body, and I'm curious to hear more about that. I know our viewers and our listeners will get a lot from the work that you do.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying about like we search for those substances, whether it's a substance or a behavior or any sort of compulsive behavior to soothe what's happening in the body. And so even in recovery, I have found that we have recovery parts of us that are really good at like picking up tools that are like, okay, I'm going to call my sponsor. I'm going to like do some writing. I'm going to go take a walk. And all of those are beautiful ways of like either distracting or regulating, right? Soothing. And at the same time, it doesn't actually address what is happening in the body. Right. And what is actually underneath and driving the behaviors. And it's the soothing of the body that actually allows for us to settle, allows to heal trauma. And that means going towards the body. So you can imagine most people, including myself, that's the last thing that you would want to do when you are getting off any sort of substance. Like the last thing you want to do is go towards your body. So most people get pretty frustrated. They, have parts that will think, will get distracted, and there's a relief in knowing like, if that happens when we go towards the body, you're getting to know your protective system. And that's equally as important as being able to be calm and still. But if you're busy and you get to know your, what's called your monkey mind in Buddhism, right? Like if you get to know your monkey mind and the defenses against going towards the body, you're still getting to know the body. The head is still the body. You have thoughts and there's a felt sensation of thoughts. So being able to get to know your parts underneath the behaviors that have been soothing, that's the key to healing. And so much of it is a relief of like, okay, I can notice my parts. I can notice my vulnerability. I can notice my sadness, my grief. There's so much grief in recovery, right? Like there's so many parts that have grief, so many parts that have shame. And to start to have a relationship with, okay, I feel this shame in my belly and I can let it know right now that I'm with it. Like I can actually just let it know that I am with it. And then the question is, what's the I, right? We all have the ability to have a sense of awareness or self-awareness that can be with our body experiences at all times. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what you were feeling. Like you wouldn't know you had a stomach ache. You wouldn't know your arm was cold, right? We have this inherent ability to have awareness. And so if we can strengthen that ability of having awareness to be with what's in the body, that is what can start to do the soothing, the reparenting. And that is spirituality if you're spiritual. And that is just increasing awareness if you are not. But there is the simplicity of like expanding your awareness is a spiritual way of being with the body. And what's the felt sense of that, of bringing the spirit to the body, right? So
Yeah.
this is kind of the way that we work with this when I'm with LGBTQ folks, whether it's the clinicians I work with or the folks that I work with in recovery. It's really simplifying, like, how can we bring that self-awareness to the body in a way that feels soothing, safe, comforting, and also just having total radical acceptance for whatever comes up.
Well, I love so much of what you're saying. And the one thing I want to lean into is this idea, and it's a continuation of not abandoning all parts of self, but you're really taking this to a deeper level, which is no, we actually celebrate and honor the different parts. I remember when I was in some early recovery, maybe 5 years sober, or my early 20s, I got sober at 20. A friend of mine died suddenly, and I was very close with him. And I immediately started grieving and crying. And then there's this part of me that came in and shut it down. And there was something so powerful in witnessing and experiencing that shutdown like I had never experienced it before. And of course, my mind went into like, I shouldn't shut down. I should be able to feel this. But what you're saying is there was something so powerful in learning about that part of myself. And I remember walking away from that, starting to become curious. Of course, I went to therapy and I talked about it. And I think what we worked with, to the best of my memory, is, okay, so what is that mechanism? Where did this mechanism originate? In what ways does it actually help? And in what ways is it blocking me from what I truly desire? I'm thinking about Pema Chodron, and she talks about, like, we all like the meditation that's blissful, but the meditation the meditation that is brutal can also be equally, and maybe in some ways even more useful, because I get to see what my mind does. I get to see what the nervous system does to block or to protect. And to know that part of ourselves is such an important step, because then I start to become curious about it. And honestly, I start to make friends with those parts instead of be at odds with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly it. Of like, there are parts of us that both as clinicians and as people in recovery get vilified as like, oh, I'm disassociating, or I am blocking, or I'm, oh, I shut down again, or, I'm having like suicidal thoughts again, right? Like it could be anything. And to be able to invite curiosity towards like, well, what has been the protective function of this?
Yeah.
And not from an intellectual place of like, okay, I know that this is protective, and it's probably because of this and probably because of that, and analyzing why we think it might be, because it's really like, okay, I feel the wall in my chest that is like completely making everything fuzzy, that is disassociating, and asking it the felt sense of that wall. What would you be curious about? What would you be fearful of if you didn't do this? Like, what would you be afraid of if you didn't put up this wall? And then just listen. And this feels like, when we talk about it, it feels crazy to like ask a sensation, right? Like, what are you fearful of if you don't create this wall? But when you're in the body and in this practice, you either hear, like, if I don't create this wall, you're going to be in danger. you're going to be seen, you're going to be judged, and you will be in danger. So you'll either hear it. Sometimes it's just a felt sense of like, if I take down the wall, then there's all this activation that would come up, right? And you feel that. So then there's this acknowledgement of like, this is a good thing. And then if you get the history of like, well, when did you start doing this? When did you start doing this wall? And it'll be like, well, I started doing this when we were getting abused. And I would, shut down and try to get small. And that getting small was actually a creative way of protecting and creating safety when there wasn't safety. And we vilify like, oh, I'm getting small. Oh, I'm self-sabotaging. Oh, and this has been like your survival. Like this has been what has kept you alive, your addiction, your eating disorder, your sex addiction, right? Like these are ways of trying to either create connection, stay alive, not die, right? So being able to honor that, this is the shame lifting that starts to happen for LGBTQ folks, where you're like, oh, finally someone gets me. Yeah. Someone gets me authentically. And it's not having to rely on protective parts that are being compliant, putting on a show, being in that role, right? Being in the role that we had to be in to survive. And we can actually see and hear who we are and what our survival has been. And there's shame lifting that starts to happen in that. And this is the trauma healing that can start to happen. And it's really, really powerful.
Yeah. And I just want to give you a standing ovation. I'm not going to stand up, but I'm giving you a standing ovation because everything you just said is so in alignment with my own experience and my own journey working with thousands of clients over the years. And also this awareness that we're moving into something much deeper than finding a new tool or a new way of distracting. And I think a lot of the recovery models, quite frankly, do that. They're like, oh, you're having a feeling, go work a step, go to 5 meetings, go work out. And all of that can be an important bridge, but we're talking about something much deeper. And that is starting to love all parts of self. And I want to kind of go a little bit deeper into something you said, and I think it's very important. So I'm pausing there. You said this isn't an intellectual process of figuring it out, right? Because we can go into, well, why do I do this? Where did this originate? What's it about? We're talking about an embodied sense of it. So the question, where did it originate, is so important. And one of the things I've become so aware of is these strategies started at a time when our brains weren't even developed. So why do I think that it's going to be a cognitive process to work with this, right? My 7-year-old's in the room, my 6-year-old's in the room, and that 6-year-old feels terrified. And you named numbing out, and that was my strategy. I would escape to my room, I would close the door, things were difficult, and I would escape into fantasy. And then I wondered why in my early recovery, I was checking out, becoming foggy, not remembering things, not able to stay present, and then I judged it. And when I started doing this deeper work, I realized that it's not about what happened in the past. It's about what's alive today and the automatic, and this is important, the automatic unconscious response to anything that we once called a trigger, but now you and I call an activation, right? We call it an activation because we could spend 3 hours, and I know there are people doing podcasts today talking for 3 hours about the external triggers. We're talking about doing the deeper healing of like, what's getting touched? What's my automatic response? How do I have compassion and love for all of those parts? And then ultimately, and you said your own version of this, but ultimately, what would I be experiencing if I were to pause from that strategy for just a moment? You called it, what would I be afraid of? And I love that. Like, what comes up for me? And can I start to tend to that? And then that work is this deeper work of like, oh my gosh, I'm working with my 5-year-old right now who felt terrified, who was told, don't throw like a girl, don't walk like a girl, don't talk like a girl. All the things that were so scary for me, even like being afraid of having physical violence toward me. So all of that is so tender. And it's like, what did I need that I didn't get then? How do I provide that for myself?
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I feel like it's, just a really beautiful example. And I can think of my own of like parts that come up with these strategies of like fantasy and distraction and in early recovery, we get to know those parts again because the substance, there's space from the part that is using the substance or the behavior. And then we get to know all of our protectors. I call them the MVPs, your most valued protectors of like disassociation, fantasy parts. And that would have been other ways before we used the substances to be able to cope, right? So we get to know those parts. And in early recovery, we have to use recovery parts that use strategies because going towards the body is too threatening. So I have real respect when I go into, no matter what rehab, once, when I do my intensives there, I have respect. People are days off meth.
Right.
I cannot ask them to go fully towards their body. That is an unfair ask, right? But for them to start to have curiosity towards the thoughts, the strategies, and to be able to have some curiosity towards it is like a big piece of like, we're heavily disassociating. I have people, that are really like, struggling to stay awake in group because of disassociation, because they're days off substances, right? So can we be curious about the tired parts? A lot of folks are like, okay, just wake up. You got to wake up in your group. And it's like, well, actually, there's a tired part that is trying to cope with the amount of stimulus I now have to face that I'm off heroin. And just being able to normalize that for somebody who's in early recovery it's important. And they need to use those strategies. But in later recovery or even later trauma work, for anybody, for therapists, we get to go underneath what is actually, those behaviors to what feels unsafe. And a lot of the time we will start to use recovery parts that are like, well, I hear that you're afraid. I get that you're scared. We don't need to do this anymore. Yeah. We are safe now. And so quickly we go into reassuring, like parts that do reassurance before we've actually heard the fear, before we've actually heard the story, heard like why they have shame, why they were shamed, the story. And we start to learn how to actually do attentive listening and how to have presence towards parts of ourselves where we're actually listening to the body, listening to their story before reassurance, so much of it is like, I get that you're afraid. We have to validate before we start to go into action. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of like, we need to validate the feelings, it's validating those feelings before we can go into, well, what do I need to do? Right. There's so much like, okay, now I'm having a feeling I need to do something.
Yeah.
So can we validate, it's awareness, acceptance, action. So you have the awareness, the self-energy, the self-awareness that can notice I'm in fear, I'm in shame. Then you have the acceptance of like, this is the feeling. I have shame. I have this feeling that's happening in my body. And part of that acceptance is also validation. I see this fear. I see the shame. I get why you have it because you're hearing the story. You're hearing what's important. And I get you. So you're repeating what they're saying. This is like imago. For folks that know imago, it's like, I feel anger. I see that you're feeling anger. I'm in shame. I see that you're feeling shame. Tell me more, right? Yeah. So we're learning how to have active listening and presence with ourselves so that then we can do that in relationships with other people. Yeah. So it's also about developing this inner intimacy so that we can develop intimacy in our relationships in recovery, in like later recovery. How do you develop intimacy in later recovery? Start to learn how to listen to yourself and then actively listen with others. And this is what's missing in our world right now. This is actually what is missing, is this ability to have presence, full presence with other people, to hear their experience, to be curious. It's part-to-part relationships. I believe this, I believe that. We're polarized, right? And being able to get curious about my own trauma or my own parts and then have a dialogue and listening and presence. I call it radical presence, right? And to do that with us, we then learn to do that with others. And this is what's missing right now in all the polarized conversations and world events that are happening right now. This is the piece that's missing this
Yeah.
curiosity, this, presence of
Yeah.
like, can we be with this and be curious about it? And also have the discernment of like, this is making me angry. This is going past my limit. And so I need to set a boundary. Right. So I don't want to say, yes, we need to have open heartedness to every behavior, because even though we might have parts that are struggling, they still can have harmful behaviors. But to have a presence to what is happening right now and being curious about it and still having our own curiosity about what's workable for us and what's not.
Yeah, my goodness, there's so much there to kind of unpack. I was thinking, I often say there are three steps: awareness, awareness, and awareness. And the reason I say that is because you named it so beautifully. Many people want to go into the action of it. And the action of it is often subtly and sometimes not so subtly. Let me get rid of this. Let me act this way so that I can get rid of this. And what we're inviting is, let's start with kind of noticing. I also love that you said it's an unfair ask, but it's also paradoxical, right? Because I think the number one recovery tool is what you're speaking to, and that is to learn how to be present with myself and to meet someone where they're at with curiosity as a clinician. Because I think a lot of times clinicians are taught, well, they're not ready yet. And that may be true. And yet a part of them might be ready, even if it's just for a moment, because we're not saying to someone who's 12 days off of meth, now let's just sit for 20 minutes and feel your body. What we are saying is, what are you noticing for 20 seconds? And 20 seconds might be an infinite amount of time to them in that experience, because they've been 20 years running from it. So it can take a lifetime, but it can happen in an instant. And I know what you're saying is there's a lot of nuance in that conversation, because when I'm working with someone brand new in recovery, it does start with curiosity. It does start with, what are you noticing? It does start with, like, I remember my first therapist would say, where do you feel that in your body? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't have yet the ability, but in the question became the curiosity. And the curiosity, the first awareness was, I have no idea what I'm feeling in my body. And that awareness alone was so powerful. Because I got to see myself. And then, of course, I went into judgment about it. And I talked to him about the shame I felt because I don't even know what's happening. And he was so gentle and said, it's okay not to be able to like do this perfectly, because that was my strategy. By the way, I call them BS brilliant strategies, because my strategy was perfectionism, and I didn't yet understand that it was because I felt so flawed. So my external strategy was looking good and looking perfect. So I did recovery perfectly, with air quotes. I knew all the page numbers when I was when I was in 12-step recovery, or whatever I was doing, I had to do it perfectly. And so for him to say, just see what you notice. And I remember, wow, I did notice something. Oh my gosh, it was this moment. And then of course, it started unpacking and unraveling a lot of the deeper emotion that was hidden. So believe it or not, we're actually basically at the end of our time. I feel like you and I could talk forever, which I love. In a moment, I'll ask you if you have any closing thoughts, but I just want to reflect to you how grateful I am to not only the work that you do, but being able to articulate it in this way. And of course, it might just be because I resonate so much. Like, our work is so synchronistic, but I have seen so much power in that. And the power in that, what do I mean? I mean, the power of the simplicity of just being fully present. And, most of the work I do today is training clinicians, not working with clients. And a big part of it as clinicians or healers of all types is, can I be present with myself right now so that I can be present with the person? So there's inviting deeper work there. Any closing thoughts? Of course, your bio and everything, contact information will be in the show notes, but I'm curious if there's anything left you want to share.
Yeah. And I think it's this idea of like, nobody's not ready. It's about getting curious about what's here, right? Like, what's here now. And I could be talking about therapists and I could be talking about clients, because guess what? We're all human and we're all the same. So I think this is like a big missing piece for healers and for therapists. This like, hey, we're allowed to be as human as our clients, and for clients to be imperfect. Like you mentioning that, there's this idea we need to be perfect people. and just inviting this humanness. And to be human is to notice whatever's happening right now, that this present moment is the teacher, and to be able to just show up for it as much as we can, and to honor when we can't show up because we're human, right?
Yeah.
So really inviting that humanness, that sense of like humanness to all people, right? Especially healers that think they have to be in some other place.
Yeah.
So because I love working with clinicians and their parts, and how do we grow the self energy for clinicians and for healing and helping professionals so that we can be the self for our clients, to be that role for them so they can wake up to their own presence, right? So, because we all have it, it's all there. So I love being able to work with both the helping professionals and the clients to awaken to our own radical presence.
And we're talking about presence with a capital P, meaning like the presence is very different than being in the moment. And we could do a whole show on that. I also want to just bookmark or acknowledge that you talked about something that I think is so important in our world. And it's a platform. It's sort of a conversation I've been in, and that is, how do we move beyond the polarization we're experiencing? So I want to invite you back for a part 2, just specifically to talk about healing the polarization. And you talked about it in such a beautiful and nuanced way. And it's one of my favorite conversations because it's so easy to be in the reactive mind or in that fight, flight, freeze response. And I see it heightened within the LGBTQ plus community, and I have compassion for it. So I want to always say I see it. I see as kind of our woundology, as my friend Simple Hayes says, being activated, and how do I move into a place of curiosity? So I would love to have you back for that conversation.
I love our conversations.
Yeah, as do I. So thank you so much for your presence and your willingness to share with our audience. Peace and blessings, everyone. You know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Adrienne and I will both look at the comments and do our best to respond. So thank you, everyone. Until the next time. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.